Imagine planning your dream vacation only to find out you're not welcome. That's the reality for Americans in 2025, as 10 countries have closed their doors. Why are these nations saying no entry to U.S. citizens? From political tensions to safety concerns, the reasons vary, but the impact is clear. Are you curious if your favorite travel spot made the list? And what does this mean for future travel plans? Stay tuned as we dive into the details of these unexpected travel bans and explore the implications for American globetrotters. Number 10. Eritrea. Eritrea, nestled in the Horn of Africa, is a country that has long been shrouded in mystery and controversy. For Americans, it's not exactly the friendliest destination. The U.S. and Eritrea have a rather frosty relationship, primarily due to political and human rights issues. Eritrea's government is known for its strict control over the economy and limited bilateral trade with the United States. This lack of economic ties means there's not much incentive for Eritrea to roll out the red carpet for American tourists or businesses. Plus, Eritrea's membership in the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa doesn't really bridge the gap with the U.S., as their Trade and Investment Framework Agreement hasn't led to significant cooperation. Safety is another concern for Americans considering a trip to Eritrea. The security situation can be unpredictable, with tensions between Eritrea and neighboring countries sometimes escalating without warning. While some sources claim that crime rates are low, especially in cities like Asmara, the risk of kidnapping and landmines near the Ethiopian border makes it a risky venture. The U.S. State Department advises against non-essential travel, which is a pretty clear sign that Americans aren't exactly encouraged to visit. For those Americans who do live in Eritrea, life isn't exactly a walk in the park. The government imposes severe restrictions on citizens' departure from the country, making it difficult for anyone, including Americans, to leave legally. This, coupled with the need for a visa just to enter, creates an environment that's less than welcoming. Recent reports highlight ongoing human rights violations, including arbitrary detention and forced labor, which only add to the reasons why Eritrea isn't high on the list of American-friendly destinations. Number 9. Bolivia. Now let's head over to South America and talk about Bolivia. This landlocked country, rich in culture and natural beauty, has had its fair share of ups and downs with the United States. Political tensions have been a significant factor in the strained relations. Bolivia's government, particularly under former President Evo Morales, often clashed with U.S. policies, accusing the U.S. of meddling in its internal affairs. This has led to a somewhat chilly reception for Americans, both politically and socially. In terms of enforcement, Bolivia hasn't outright banned Americans, but the sentiment isn't always warm. The Bolivian government has taken steps to reduce U.S. influence, such as expelling the U.S. ambassador back in 2008. While things have calmed down since then, the legacy of these actions lingers, and Americans might find themselves facing bureaucratic hurdles when trying to navigate Bolivian systems. For Americans living in Bolivia, the experience can be mixed. While many enjoy the vibrant culture and stunning landscapes, they also have to navigate a complex political landscape. The Bolivian government has made efforts to improve relations, but progress is slow. Recent news suggests that while there are no major hostilities, the relationship remains cautious. Americans in Bolivia often have to stay informed about local politics to ensure they don't inadvertently step into a diplomatic minefield. Before we continue, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Number 8. Sudan. Sudan, a country rich in history and culture, has been through quite a roller coaster ride over the years. For Americans, it's not exactly the friendliest place right now. The U.S. Department of State has had a Level 4 travel advisory for Sudan since June 2021, which basically means do not travel. This isn't just a suggestion, it's a pretty strong warning. The reason? Well, Sudan has been grappling with a brutal civil war since April 2023, which has only worsened an already dire humanitarian crisis. Before the conflict erupted, about 15.8 million people were in need of humanitarian aid. Now, nearly 30 million Sudanese are facing acute food insecurity, with 8.7 million on the brink of famine. It's a tough situation, and the violence makes it unsafe for anyone, let alone tourists. For those Americans who do find themselves in Sudan, getting around isn't easy. The government requires U.S. citizens to have a passport with at least 6 months of validity and an entry visa or permit upon arrival. And if you're thinking of just popping over for a quick visit, think again. The only way to get a visa is through a Sudanese embassy, and it's not a simple process. Plus, the conditions for Americans living there aren't exactly rosy, with violent crimes such as carjackings and kidnappings being common, especially in places like Juba. It's a constant challenge to stay safe. In terms of recent developments, the U.S. has been trying to navigate its relationship with Sudan carefully. After the military coup in October 2021, the U.S. condemned the actions and suspended $700 million in aid. While there have been efforts to broker peace, like the ceasefire announced in June 2023, the situation remains volatile. The U.S. strategy focuses on ending conflicts and human rights abuses, but it's a long road ahead. So, for now, Sudan remains a place where Americans are advised to steer clear. Number 7. Libya. Now let's shift gears to Libya, another country where Americans might want to think twice before booking a flight. Libya has been in turmoil since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi in 2011. The power vacuum left behind has led to ongoing conflict between rival factions vying for control. This instability makes it a challenging environment for foreigners, including Americans. The U.S. Embassy in Tripoli has been closed since 2014 due to security concerns, and the State Department advises against all travel to Libya. For Americans who are in Libya, the situation is precarious. The country is divided between the Government of National Unity in the west and the Libyan National Army in the east, leading to frequent clashes. This division has resulted in a lack of centralized authority, making it difficult to ensure safety and security. The presence of armed groups and militias further complicates matters, and the risk of kidnapping and violence is high. It's not a place where you can easily blend in and go unnoticed. Despite these challenges, there are still some Americans living in Libya, often working in the oil industry or with international organizations. However, their numbers are small, and they face significant risks. The U.S. government has limited ability to provide assistance, and evacuation options are scarce. In recent news, there have been attempts to stabilize the country through international mediation, but progress is slow. The U.S. continues to support efforts for a political solution, but until then, Libya remains a place where Americans are not particularly welcome. Number 6. Venezuela. Venezuela, once a thriving nation rich in oil reserves, has become a challenging place for Americans to visit or reside in. The U.S. government strongly advises against traveling to Venezuela due to severe political instability and high crime rates. The country is grappling with widespread shortages of essential resources like food, water, and medicine, making daily life difficult for its citizens and even more so for foreigners. Violent crime, including homicide, armed robbery, kidnapping, and carjacking, is alarmingly common. This environment poses significant risks, especially for Americans who might be seen as targets for arbitrary arrest and detention. The strained relations between the U.S. and Venezuela further exacerbate these issues, with extensive U.S. sanctions imposed on the Maduro regime for corruption, economic mismanagement, and human rights violations. The humanitarian crisis in Venezuela is another critical factor contributing to the country's unwelcoming stance towards Americans. Political unrest and economic decline have driven millions of Venezuelans to flee the country in search of better living conditions. As of June 2024, over 7.7 million Venezuelans had left since 2014. The situation is dire, with approximately 9.3 million people facing moderate to severe food insecurity. The COVID-19 pandemic has only worsened these conditions, highlighting the country's inadequate health infrastructure. For the estimated 23,000 U.S. citizens residing in Venezuela, primarily in Caracas, life is fraught with challenges. They face the same shortages and security concerns as locals, compounded by the risk of being caught in the crossfire of political tensions. Recent developments have not been promising. While Venezuelan exports to the U.S. saw a slight increase in early 2025, the overall relationship remains tense. The U.S. continues to implement sanctions as a tool to combat terrorism-related activities, narcotics trafficking, and human rights abuses. Despite these efforts, the humanitarian crisis persists, with millions still in need of urgent assistance. The U.S. has shown some support for Venezuelan refugees, with temporary protected status, TPS, initially granted in March 2021 and extended until October 2026. However, the revocation of TPS for many Venezuelans in early 2025 has added uncertainty to their future in the U.S., reflecting the complex and often contentious nature of U.S.-Venezuela relations. Number 5. Cuba. Cuba, just 90 miles off the coast of Florida, has long been a point of contention in U.S. foreign policy. The island nation is known for its vibrant culture, classic cars, and cigars, but it's also notorious for its strained relationship with the United States. The U.S. embargo on Cuba, which has been in place for decades, is a significant factor in the chilly reception Americans might receive. This embargo restricts trade and travel, creating an environment where Americans are not always welcomed with open arms. The Cuban government views the embargo as a hostile act, and this sentiment can sometimes extend to American visitors. For the Americans living in Cuba, life can be a mixed bag. While they might enjoy the island's unique charm and slower pace of life, they also face challenges related to the embargo. Access to certain goods and services can be limited, and the political climate can be tense. The number of Americans residing in Cuba is relatively small, and those who do live there often have strong ties to the local community or work in specific sectors like education or healthcare. Despite these connections, the overarching political tensions can make life complicated. In recent years, there have been some attempts to thaw relations between the U.S. and Cuba. During the Obama administration, there was a notable effort to improve diplomatic ties, leading to the reopening of embassies in both countries. However, subsequent administrations have taken a more hardline approach, reinstating some restrictions and maintaining the embargo. This back and forth has created an uncertain environment for Americans interested in visiting or doing business in Cuba. While the cultural allure of Cuba remains strong, the political landscape continues to pose challenges for fostering a more welcoming atmosphere for Americans. Number 4. Yemen. Yemen, a country that has been embroiled in conflict for over a decade, is not exactly rolling out the welcome mat for Americans. The U.S. Department of State has issued a Level 4 travel advisory, which is essentially a big red do not enter sign due to terrorism, civil unrest, and a host of other dangers. The situation is so dire that the U.S. Embassy in Sana'a suspended operations back in February 2015, leaving American citizens without consular services. This means if you find yourself in a pickle, you're pretty much on your own. The Houthis, who control large swaths of northern Yemen, have been known to detain U.S. citizens, including those with dual citizenship, often without allowing them to contact their families or receive visits from consular personnel. It's a grim reality that underscores the precariousness of being an American in Yemen. The humanitarian crisis in Yemen is one of the worst in the world, with more than 19 million people in need of assistance as of early 2025. Basic infrastructure like housing, medical facilities, and utilities have been decimated by ongoing military conflict. This makes access to essentials like electricity, clean water, and medical care incredibly difficult. Humanitarian groups face significant obstacles in delivering aid, and landmines are scattered throughout the country, posing a constant threat. Health services are in shambles, with diseases like cholera, polio, and measles making a comeback due to the lack of medical supplies and adequate treatment facilities. For Americans living there, the conditions are harsh, and the risk of kidnapping and detention is high, especially for dual nationals. Despite these challenges, the United States remains one of the largest donors of humanitarian and developmental assistance to Yemen, working closely with the United Nations to support the country's stability and economic recovery. However, the presence of terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula and ISIS, along with the influence of Iran, complicates efforts to bring peace and security to the region. Recent news highlights continued violence and instability, with reports of U.S. attacks targeting militant groups. The situation remains volatile, and while diplomatic efforts continue, the path to peace is fraught with obstacles. Number 3. Syria. Syria, another country where Americans aren't exactly greeted with open arms, has been ravaged by a brutal civil war since 2011. The conflict has created a complex web of alliances and enmities, with various factions vying for control. The U.S. government advises against all travel to Syria due to terrorism, civil unrest, and the risk of arbitrary arrest and detention. The Syrian government, led by President Bashar al-Assad, has been accused of numerous human rights violations, and the presence of extremist groups like ISIS only adds to the danger. For Americans, the risk of being caught in the crossfire or targeted by hostile forces is alarmingly high. The humanitarian situation in Syria is dire, with millions displaced and in need of aid. The infrastructure has been severely damaged, making it difficult for residents to access basic necessities like food, water, and healthcare. The ongoing conflict has also led to a resurgence of diseases, further straining the already limited medical resources. For the few Americans who remain in Syria, life is fraught with challenges, and the threat of violence is ever present. The U.S. government has limited ability to provide assistance, and those who choose to stay do so at their own peril. Efforts to address the hostility towards Americans in Syria are complicated by the geopolitical dynamics of the region. The U.S. has been involved in military operations against ISIS and has supported opposition groups fighting the Assad regime. However, these actions have not endeared the U.S. to the Syrian government or its allies. Recent news reports indicate ongoing tensions, with sporadic clashes and airstrikes continuing to disrupt any semblance of normalcy. While diplomatic channels remain open, the path to resolving the conflict and improving relations with the U.S. is uncertain. Number 2. Iran. Next up, Iran. Now, if you're an American thinking about visiting Iran, you might want to think twice. The U.S. Department of State has slapped a Level 4 Do Not Travel advisory on Iran. Why, you ask? Well, it's a cocktail of reasons. There's the risk of terrorism, civil unrest, and the ever-looming threat of kidnapping and arbitrary arrest. U.S. citizens have been wrongfully detained, sometimes for years, on charges like espionage or posing a national security threat. And if you're a dual U.S.-Iranian national, things get even trickier. Iran doesn't recognize dual nationality, so you could be treated solely as an Iranian citizen, which means limited consular access if you find yourself in a pickle. Now let's talk numbers. There aren't many Americans living in Iran these days, especially given the tense political climate. Back in 1978, there were about 41,000 Americans in Iran, but those numbers have dwindled significantly. For those who do live there, life can be complicated. U.S. citizens residing in Iran need an exit permit every time they leave the country, and dual nationals face the risk of having their U.S. passports confiscated. The Swiss embassy in Tehran acts as the protecting power for U.S. interests, but assistance is limited, especially for dual nationals. Recent news hasn't done much to thaw relations between the two nations. In February 2025, the U.S. ramped up sanctions against Iran, targeting weapons proliferators as part of a maximum pressure campaign. This move only adds fuel to the fire of historical hostility. Iran, on its part, continues to condemn what it sees as hostile actions from Washington. So if you're an American thinking of heading to Iran, maybe consider a staycation instead. Number 1. North Korea. Next on our list is North Korea, a place that's as mysterious as it is unwelcoming to Americans. The U.S. government has long advised against travel to North Korea, and for good reason. The regime is known for its strict control over visitors, and Americans are no exception. In fact, since 2017, the U.S. has banned its citizens from traveling to North Korea without special permission. This came after the tragic case of Otto Warmbier, an American student who was detained in North Korea and later died after being returned to the U.S. in a coma. As for Americans living in North Korea, well, that's practically unheard of. The country is one of the most isolated in the world, and the few foreigners who do reside there are usually diplomats or aid workers. The conditions for anyone living in North Korea are challenging, to say the least, with strict surveillance and limited freedom of movement. The regime's recent missile tests and nuclear ambitions have only heightened tensions with the U.S., making any form of diplomatic or personal exchange even more difficult. In terms of recent developments, North Korea remains a wild card on the global stage. The country's leader, Kim Jong-un, continues to pursue nuclear capabilities, much to the chagrin of the international community. Talks between the U.S. and North Korea have stalled, and the future of relations remains uncertain. For now, North Korea remains a place where Americans are definitely not on the guest list. If you enjoyed this video, let us know in the comment section down below and turn on your notifications to know when next we upload. See you in our next video. Bye-bye.